you have a proof of A or B and you want to establish C. What do? You make two cases. You assume A, and you know already that if you have A, then you have C, or you assume B. But if you have B, then you also have, if B then C, so you have C. So in either case you have C. So the point is, that's the way in which Hilbert articulated axioms that allow you to introduce and eliminate connectors in a sensible way. And so it was a methodological paradigm to what he had done in geometry for concepts. He did here for logical concepts. And he and Bernas also thought that this way of articulating logical principles allows you to give much more easily the formalization of mathematical arguments. So here, in any event, are the corresponding rules of natural reduction. A natural reduction is formulated in one-sided sequent calculus. So the gamma on the left-hand side of this horseshoe indicates the assumptions on which the argument for A, respectively A or B, and for C, respectively the subparts, depends. Okay? So these rules just articulate what I did earlier in a formal way. For natural reduction calculi, we have normalization procedures and normal form theorems. And normal or direct proofs have interesting and very important structural properties. Namely, that if you have a path in a proof conceived of as a tree, then you know that it can be divided into two pieces. The first piece consists only of applications of elimination rules, and the second part only of introduction rules. So they have very global features, but these global features ground, or can be taken to ground, dynamic, strategically guided search procedures in classical, intuitionistic, and minimal predicate logic. And this approach can also be extended to elementary set theory, using introduction and elimination rules for the set theoretic fundamental concepts and operations. So, bringing back what Hilbert in a certain way had done for geometric concepts. So here, for example, are appropriate rules, natural reduction rules, introduction, elimination rules, for one of the basic set theoretic operations, union. So if you have established that X is in A union B, then you can infer that X is in A, X is in B. And if you infer that X is in A or X is in B, then you can infer that X is in union of A and B. And this can be expanded to a significant part of set theory, so that in that context you can actually prove or verify the so-called Cantor-Bernstein theorem, which is non-trivial, but also not ridiculously difficult. That we have done, I've done with a number of collaborators, and we are trying to push now the automated proof of these matters through. We'll see how it goes. What we have done along these lines earlier is the proof of the incompleteness theories. So if one takes for granted the representability and derivability conditions, then our theorem prover, called APROS, can actually prove the incompleteness theorems in a very direct and straightforward way. And I hope that something of this sort will also be possible for set theory. But we have to see. So, let me just go through this. I suppose that is the only thing I wanted to mention briefly. So, I try to distinguish in local and global axiomatics. Local, when you isolate what is, in a certain sense, needed for a proof of a particular theorem. Taking for granted lemmas, principles, quite freely. So, for example, in the proof of the incompleteness theorems, representability, derivability conditions are taken for granted. So I consider this to be a local analysis of a particular theorem. Whereas the way in which we are treating the Cantor-Downstein theorem, there we actually want to do it in a global way. Global meaning the sublamator, informal principles that are used, for example, in the proofs that were given by Bernstein, or for that matter, Liedeke. They are proved in the context of Zambino's axiomatization of set theory. Okay, so in that sense, it is a global presentation of that particular theorem. So it is not just isolating out the leading mathematical idea for this proof, but also establishing the needed lemmata principles for the articulation from basic underlying principles. Here, the axiom set theory. Now, this conceptual organization seems to me to be extremely important, and it was emphasized already by Liedeke in his habilitation talk in 1854. He said, "The need to introduce new and appropriate notions arises ultimately from the fact that human intellectual powers are imperfect. The limitation leads us to frame the object of a science in different forms, and introducing a concept means, in a certain sense, formulating a hypothesis concerning the inner nature of a science." Now, human intellectual powers are imperfect, but he attributes to us the possibility of introducing new abstract notions as hypotheses concerning the inner nature of a particular science. And that, as a matter of fact, is what Gödel, I don't know whether he was aware of this connection, took up in a remark he wrote in 1972. Is interesting for this connection, but also because of its title. It's a one-page note, and its title is "A Philosophical Error in Turing's Work." Okay. And that's what he says. Turing gives an argument which is supposed to show that mental procedures cannot go beyond mechanical procedures. However, this argument is inconclusive. What Turing disregards completely is the fact that mind in its use is not static, but constantly developing. Keep that in mind. And so, what does Turing have in mind? That is, and he continues, that we understand abstract terms more and more as we go on using them, and that more and more abstract terms enter the sphere of our understanding. So that re-emphasizes what Liedeke said. Introduction of new abstract notions that help us to consolidate our knowledge and broaden and deepen our knowledge of matters. As far as Turing is concerned, I think Gödel was slightly unfair. I mean, first of all, again, if you trust my presentation of Turing, there is no discussion of mental procedures at all, and no claim that mental procedures might not go beyond mechanical ones. But mechanical general procedures are reduced to pure machine computations. In any event, in a paper of the late 1940s, Turing states what I take to be the central problem of cognitive psychology, where he discusses, in a certain sense, what Gödel found missing in his work. He says, if the untrained infant's mind is to become an intelligent one, it must acquire both discipline and initiative. So far we have been considering only discipline. Discipline being universal Turing machine. But discipline is certainly not enough in itself to produce intelligence. That which is required in addition we call initiative. The statement will serve as a definition. Our task is to discover the nature of this residue as it occurs in man and try to copy it in machines. The mathematical mind is a primary focus for both Gödel and Turing. Once the almost purely terminological differences are removed, their ways of addressing issues can be seen to parallel each other, even when based on quite different philosophical perspectives. They could have agreed, terminologically, that there is a human mind whose work is not reducible to the working of any particular brain. And that was a contention of the late Gödel. Towards the end of Intelligent Machinery, Turing emphasizes that the isolated man does not develop any intellectual power and argues it is necessary for him to be immersed in an environment of other men whose techniques he absorbs during the first 20 years of his life. He may then perhaps do a little research on his own and make a very few discoveries which are passed on to other men. From this point of view, the search for new techniques must be regarded as carried out by a human community as a whole, rather than by individuals. That is obviously a wide and open field for speculation. There are also fascinating opportunities for more concrete, focused computational work in the Hilbertian tradition. And that's where I see this attempt of automated research to lie. Let me finish with a few quotations by Hilbert and then by a late student in Göttingen, who later became a quite famous mathematician in category theory. In any event. So here's the Hilbert quote. We must, that is my conviction, take the concept of the specifically mathematical truth as an object of investigation, just as the astronomer has to consider the movement of his position. Physicists are studying the theories of his apparatus, and the philosopher criticizes reason itself. And 10 years later, in a talk in Hamburg, he said, the fundamental idea of my proof theory is none other than to describe the activity of our understanding, to make a protocol of the rules according to which our thinking actually proceeds. 5 years later, he looked like this, little age from the earlier picture that he had. And I mentioned, and give you two quotations, not from that period, but rather, in 1934, an American finished his thesis in Göttingen. Hilbert was no longer professor of mathematics, but his student, Hermann Weyl, had succeeded him, and this American turned to Weyl to finish his thesis. The thesis was called on abbreviated proofs in the logical calculus. About 40 years later, in the late 70s, collected papers of this mathematicians were published by a colleague, and in particular also the translation of his early dissertation. And this mathematician looked back at his dissertation, and I want to quote two reflections of his. The first one is this. Proofs are not mere collections of atomic processes, but rather complex combinations with a highly rational structure. Second, there remains the real question of the actual structure of mathematical proofs and their strategy. It's a topic long given up by mathematical logicians, but one which still, properly handled, might give us some real insight. That's what I'm hoping for from proof-based investigations. Thank you very much.
Antes de pasar a la sesión sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Si quiero informarles que va a haber una sesión libre de discusión en Sieg, en el salón 302 de Limas. Es 2 pisos arriba. Entonces, para los que quieran venir, es a las 4 de la tarde, 4 o 5 minutos. Todo el mundo está invitado.